Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me for my regular update from Washington. Before I get into the issues that we're addressing here on Capitol Hill, let me say I'm closely monitoring the outbreak of wildfires that have mostly been in the Shenandoah Valley with the high winds over the last couple of days. My hope is with the rains coming this weekend, they will subside. I know the Shenandoah National Park is closed today, and I think even schools in Page County. And obviously, if we'll monitor how much damage and if there is anything my office can do to assist if there is the need for a disaster declaration, we will keep abreast of that. Three topics at the top I want to hit on. First, and if you've heard this from me before about government shutdowns, you've got a right to hear it from me again. We're now, I think, the fifth or sixth time this fiscal year where we've either blown by a deadline or approached a deadline before acting. The second half, well, about 10 days ago, we passed about a third of the permanent government funding bills for this fiscal year, which, by the way, is already 5.5 months into it. We will take up the balance, the House will take up the balance of the $1.2 trillion in federal spending. And these are very important bills to Virginia in terms of DOD and all of our military installations, very important in terms of added beds and personnel on the border, very important in terms of a host of areas across almost 2/3 of the government. The House will take that up at some point today or tomorrow morning, and the Senate will, I hope, act on it tomorrow before we go into a shutdown, partial shutdown at least tomorrow night. This is a crazy way to run the federal government of the United States. We need to stick to deadlines. We need to get our work done on time. As I've explained to you guys and anybody who will listen, every time we go into one of these continuing resolutions, there is no state in the country that gets hit harder than Virginia. There is no state in the country that gets hit harder if there's a government shutdown, because our concentration of DOD, because the Navy and Hampton Roads, because the number of government contractors, oftentimes who aren't even getting paid during shutdowns. And as I've often cited the example, if you're operating on last year's budget and you're in the ship repair business, you got your money appropriated last year. If you finish that ship repair, you can't start on the next ship because it was funded in the last year if you're relying on what's called the continuing resolution of funding from last year. I know a little bit bureaucrat speak, but suffice it to say, it should not have taken this long. This was due to the chaos in the House, where they couldn't even have a speaker for multiple weeks on end. But my hope is by probably late tomorrow night, government funding will, for this fiscal year, which ends September 30th, will be completed. That means the next item we have to take up is the question of funding for Ukraine, as well as the other supplemental funding in terms of aid to Israel, humanitarian aid to Gaza, assistance in the South China Sea in terms of China and Taiwan. But Ukraine is critical. If we don't honor this commitment, we could see American forces in harm's way, I think, within a couple years, because Putin will not stop at Ukraine's border, and the adjacent states, the Baltic nations and Poland, are all NATO members, and we could have that kind of pressure on the border taking place if Putin is successful. And as I've often said on this, if we don't get this done, I question whether any other nation around the world will ever trust our country again. And at a moment of such international challenge all over the world, not just in Europe, but with Ukraine, that is not a good place for us to be. So a number of us in a bipartisan way met with the Senate leadership yesterday. We're continuing to pressure our House colleagues. The truth is, this bill, in terms of Ukraine support, would get over 300 votes, and it's crazy that the House has not voted on it. So I was hoping we could get it done before we go into this break. Every day and week that goes on, Ukraine's position gets more precarious because they are so not undermatched in bravery, but if they don't have the arms and equipment, if Ukrainian soldiers are being issued 10 to 20 bullet ration per day, then they cannot beat back the Russian aggressor. So it is critically important that we take that legislation up. Last item, on a totally different subject. One of the issues that I think that I've been interested in since my time as governor is how we get folks who may have made a mistake and committed a crime, go to prison, how they re-enter themselves into society after they've paid their debt to society. Is why I was interested and active in voter registration, or restoration of rights, voting rights. It is why, even when I was governor, constantly tried to put in some additional funding for reentry programs around Commonwealth. At the federal level, one of the things that is pretty stunning is 48% of the prisoners who, once they've served their sentence in federal prison and leave prison, 48% come out with no valid ID, no birth certificate, no driver's license, no other indication of identity. And we all know in today's world, whether you want to get a job or rent a car or rent an apartment, you've got to have valid ID. So, along with my friend Tom Tillis, the Republican senator from North Carolina, we are introducing a piece of legislation that would have the Federal Bureau of Prisons provide a photo ID identification card, and this legislation would make sure that card was recognized as a valid government ID for those individuals who have paid their debt to society, leaving federal prison. Giving them an easier access back to get a job and get housing is the right thing to do, smart thing to do, and I hope the Senate will take up this legislation shortly. With that, I know I've not hit TikTok, I've not hit a couple other things. I imagine I'll get those in the questions, but I'll turn it back over to you, Laura, so we can get started.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for joining us. Related to TikTok, the chair of the Commerce Committee, Senator Cantwell, has indicated interest in holding a joint hearing with your panel. Would you be open to that? And now that that classified briefing has been held, what would you like to see happen next in the Senate?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we act. 352 votes in the House is an overwhelming bipartisan majority. I've been talking about this issue for over a year. I don't underestimate TikTok's aggressive tactics, both in terms of lobbying or advertising or, frankly, putting out misinformation and disinformation. So I think we need to act. I mean, I originally I thought my bill approach was better, but the House bill got through, and I'm anxious to support it if there needs to slightly amend it to address legitimate concerns. I'm obviously open to that as well, and I would welcome the chance to work with my friend Maria Cantwell to get this done. And then, what I also want to make sure is that, and I apologize, there was some background noise here, that we do this in a way that's timely. This is a national security threat. China is literally has the potential to take up a lot of American data, has the potential to use TikTok as frankly, a more powerful propaganda tool than any of our existing American networks. And again, remember, at the end of the day, it is controlled by the Communist Party of China. And that is a huge concern. I know some people have said, well, if you don't have a smoking gun of a current misuse, then why do we need to act? Well, under that theory, if China has missiles and guns pointed at Taiwan, or if Russia has nuclear weapons pointed at America, that theory would be, well, that's just a potential threat, not a real threat, and we shouldn't have to deal with it. It becomes real. That is not the right way we ought to approach this. And the more we can do to make sure all my colleagues both get any necessary classified briefings, but also get as much education as possible on the issue, the better.
Senator, our next question is Tom Fitzgerald with Fox 5. Tom? Okay, we're going to move on to Rachel Tillepaugh with WSET.
Hi, Senator Warner. My question is, how are you and other U.S. elected working to fix the income and inflation gap, and how are you going to make Americans' quality of life better and more affordable in the future?
Well, the good news is that inflation has been coming down. The bad news is it's not coming down fast enough. And for most, and you have to break the income adjustment and rises that have taken place against inflation. Not every quintile of the American population has actually, many quintiles have actually seen higher income increases than inflation increases. Not everybody. So that is still an issue, particularly around issues around housing. And so I've got legislation, for example, today that I've introduced with Senator Warnock from Georgia that would provide additional down payment assistance for first-time, first-generation home buyers. I think that would make a lot of sense. One of the tax bills that have passed the House that we need to take up in the Senate would also extend the low-income tax credit, how we can provide more rental housing, because, again, housing is the biggest driver of inflation at this point. Part of what's already in the law, and we saw some relief last year, was that where the federal government finally started negotiating on drug prices. So we've seen, and I say this as a father of a type 1 diabetic daughter, we've seen the prices of insulin come down to about $35 a month. The more we do that with other drugs, the better we'll be able to bring down that piece of the inflationary spiral. But at the end of the day, the most important thing we can do is, in terms of prosperity for this country, is continue to provide great jobs. And whether it is the infrastructure bill, which I was proud to be one of the key authors on, which is literally providing hundreds, if not thousands of miles of additional broadband right now across the Commonwealth, additional roads, bridges being constructed. Those are great jobs. The CHIPS bill, which has helped bring back the semiconductor industry for the United States. That is important from a national security consideration vis-a-vis China and Russia again, but it's also important in terms of creating those jobs here. And we continue to make, one of the subjects I've spent a long time on is artificial intelligence and how that becomes a tool to both have economic growth, but also how we make sure that we don't get humans, in a sense, passed out of the equation. One of the things that the data centers and the power generated for artificial intelligence that will be required is going to mean need for a lot more power. I'm a big advocate of small modular nuclear reactors as a clean, carbon-free, and I believe long-term, very affordable path for additional power that our data centers need. We've got a lot of those data centers in Virginia. So I think the economic outlook, frankly, for the United States is better than any other industrial nation in the world. Have we got more work to do? Absolutely. But I think I wouldn't trade our position economically with any other nation in the world.
Senator, our next question is Doug Boynton with WHRO. Doug? Okay, we're going to move on to Kayla Hewitt with WAMU.
Hi, Senator. Thanks so much for holding the time. My question is about DCA and the long-haul flights FAA reauthorization. Obviously, you and Senator Kaine put out that letter pointing out this issue of the already stretched thin services there, the extra 10 million passengers that they're serving without, that having been part of the original design. Obviously, you're against adding more long-haul flights to DCA, but are you considering any kind of legislation to improve the services at DCA to accommodate those 10 million passengers?
Well, remember, our concerns about DCA, Reagan Airport, is not just from Virginia. This is something we're working in close collaboration with our partners in Maryland, and the district is supportive as well. Jamming more flights into DCA, usually driven by politicians who want to have a flight, a more convenient flight for their personal purposes. I don't think it's the right way to solve this issue. As you indicated, we're about 10 million flights over what DCA was initially proposed and designed for. And there's just not a way, because it's landlocked, to create additional capacity there. That's why we have BWI, that's why we have Dulles. And our point has been, Congress, don't meddle. You don't meddle in the match between Chicago O'Hare Airport and Chicago Midway Airport. You let the airport professionals deal with that. You should do the same thing here in the greater Washington area. Let the FAA and safety concerns generate flight patterns, not political interests. So we are concerned. We're concerned about further delays. We're concerned about safety. We're concerned about neighborhood infringement. The good news is that the House stripped out any additional flights. The Senate proposal, which has not ever come to the floor, but the Senate proposal would add 5 additional flights. Our position is the Senate in this case should accede to the House. There are these negotiations going on between the respective committees. Neither I or Tim or our Maryland senators are on those committees, but we are following this very closely. I wish there was a piece of legislation other than saying, Congress, don't meddle in the DMV's regional airport policies. There's not anything other than that we can do that would actually expand capacity in a dramatic way that I've been aware of, at least.
Senator, we're going to jump back to Doug Boynton.
Hi. Hey, Senator, and thank you. There's talk all the time about how pleased Putin must be over our inaction on Ukraine. Is there any indication that those who are against aid to Ukraine are somehow being incentivized by Russia?
We have no evidence of that, but the fact that Russia has historically tried to meddle in our elections, and again, the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee did the comprehensive investigation, 5-volume set that laid out Russia's interference in our 2016 elections. We continue to see, and there's plenty of public reporting about how Russia continues to spread misinformation and disinformation. They love to see America in conflict. And it's clear in this election cycle, and the intelligence community is completely clear on this, is that China, Russia, Iran, and potentially other nation states will try to intervene because it's effective and cheap. And in a time now, unfortunately, where Americans are so polarized and so many people are willing to believe almost anything and are suspicious of and even our electoral system, that combined with these new artificial intelligence tools, particularly around deep fakes, having your voice or my face appear and say things that we don't really say, could be catastrophic. And I think it's pretty clear, at least based upon past efforts and comments that Putin has made himself, he's got a pretty clear choice in terms of how he'd like to see elections play out in America this year. So I am concerned. I am concerned about Russia's efforts. I've yet to have anyone give me, I think, other than a pure isolationist approach that says America completely pull back, why we shouldn't stand by our Ukrainian allies, along with Europe, along with the expanded NATO. And the one thing I have heard from some people that I think shows a remarkable lack of foreign policy 101, where they say, well, I don't mind Putin dealing with Ukraine, but I'm really concerned about President Xi and China. If you don't get the connection that there is a linkage between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, these authoritarian regimes, and that when one wins, all of them are benefited, then you shouldn't be making foreign policy in this country.
Senator, our final question will be Amy Knowles with the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. I saw where you met with students from John R. Lewis High School recently. You posted, I love to hear from Virginians of all ages so I can share updates from Congress and hear about the issues that matter to them. What were some of the issues that you spoke with those students about, and what action steps can young people take to be part of the solution?
Well, Amy, thank you so much. You always are a breath of fresh air at the end of these interviews that give me hope again. The point I tried to make is that to those students, and virtually every student group I speak with, is they're oftentimes taking a tour of the Capitol, and I make the point that what we do here is going to matter to your life, whether you like it or not. And for many times, the young people's voices are not fully represented in a system where we still spend $7 or $8 federal dollars for those of us over 65 and only about $1 for people under 18 in terms of where our federal resources go. And so my first request to students is to get involved. I don't care what your politics are. but get involved, vote, participate. I do say that if I'd urge people to hire people into elective office who know how to get to yes. As a former business guy, I always thought one of the crazy things about politics where you've got a lot of people that can tell you what they're against, but if they don't know how to get to actually a solution, then we don't get anything done. And what I hear from students are a lot of interest around things like artificial intelligence, a lot of interest around how technology is going to be part of their lives, a lot of interest on how we can make higher education more affordable. And there are a variety of programs I've supported that try to do that. But in this area as well, there's a lot more work to be done. Appreciate the question.
Senator, that was our final question.
Thanks, everybody.